So, to continue our journey through the evolution or the changes of the 5 basic principles, we're stopping now at federalism. And don't forget, we always go through this series of questions, or I guess it's a roadmap of how we're going to approach the way these things have changed. So the first thing we always do is we look at how the founding fathers originally wanted the Constitution to be, okay? Then, the next thing we do is we look at what the actual Constitution says. The third thing we do is kind of look throughout history and see if anything specific happened in history to cause this change. And then the last thing we do is we kind of look, are there any other like informal procedures and whatnot that sort of solidify or clarify these basic principles and how they've changed, okay? And again, that last one doesn't happen that often, but those first 3 let's try to focus on. So, what is federalism? Federalism is a system of government where there is a central government that governs the states, and each state has its own government that governs the people. So we have one government that governs the states, but then there's also, I guess technically 50 different governments that govern the people. It's the people that live in that state. Federalism. And this is born out of that colonists and their fear of too strong of a government. They wanted to make sure that the state still had some sort of sovereignty and some sort of power, so that way they can kind of keep the federal government in check. Is in our flow chart, if you will, or our sort of like form that we follow when we're trying to figure out how these basic principles have changed, is we need to look at what the founding fathers said about federalism. Okay, what did they say about the concept of federalism, the principle of federalism? And we know that we can go to the Federalist essays in this instance. We're going to get Federalist number 45, okay? And in Federalist number 45, Madison says that the federal government cannot operate without the support of state governments. It's almost like a popular sovereignty, but taken to the next level, to the states are the ones giving the federal government its authority to govern, if you will. It's a collection of states, right, that create this federal government. He says that the states have many benefits to gain from a federal government. Specifically, the state is able to focus on the welfare of the people, meaning the state can focus on its citizenry. While the federal government is able to focus on problems outside the United States, like bigger international problems, things that might get in the way of serving the needs of the actual people, such as war, peace, negotiating treaties, and maybe national taxation, all right? So he's saying this is a good way to departmentalize our responsibilities as a nation. We can give the federal government certain powers to manage other things, whereas each state can care for the individuals and protect the individuals' rights and just provide a better experience for Americans. Federalist 45.
Oh, time to go.
I like this, the first bell I've heard. I heard the lunch bell, that's not true. Now, he does say some things about federal power. Madison admits that federal power may need to expand under certain circumstances, okay? He says that in times of war, the power of the federal government will expand. It needs to respond quickly to those threats, to those national security threats, if you will. So it says that, they might take a little more power in those times. And then he says, look, in times of peace, then the power should flow back to the states. It should be reduced from the federal government and given back to the states. Now, I might be foreshadowing a little here, but that's not exactly what always happens. Maybe the federal government gains some power, but then they give just a little bit back, and then they gain, and give just a little bit back. And so over time, the federal government has really expanded well beyond its original intention. And a lot of that, is thanks to a series of historical events, but most specifically, the one that comes to my mind first is the Great Depression and Roosevelt's New Deal. That was a really big expansion of federal power, and it hasn't ever quite relinquished back to its original form as it was before. Okay. Big thing. The federal government will need to gain more power in times of crises, but supposedly in times of peace, it should give the power back to the states. Ebb and flow. Think of it as maybe like tide patterns. Comes in and goes out. What does the Constitution say on the matter? All right, so we know what the Founding Fathers said. Our next step, we're gonna look at the Constitution. And specifically, I like these two examples or these two pieces of the Constitution. The first one is the Supremacy Clause. This clause shows that anytime a state and federal law conflict with each other, the federal law must be followed, okay? So it gives the federal government, supreme power, if you will. And in a sense, this clause is already limiting the powers held by the state, meaning if the states truly don't like something, but the federal government has a law against it, well, sorry, states are out of luck until maybe they go through like a Supreme Court case or a larger, judicial interpretation of the law. And then the Founding Fathers were, and mainly the Anti-Federalists, I think were quite smart in adding this 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is the Reserved Powers Clause. What that means that the only the powers listed in the Constitution belong to the federal government. Any power not listed belongs to the state, okay? Basically, the federal powers are small and the state powers are indefinite. So what that means is that the federal government can only do what it says in the Constitution.
Wouldn't it be kind of a loophole for the states? Think about it, like what if you said that states have the power to take money from the states, or other states or something like that?
No, because the states don't have to, respect that or follow that. Because no state is supreme over another. So they're all equal, so they would just be, no, you can't do that. Now, we do have to recognize licenses. So like if you drive your car to Indiana, they must recognize your driver's license. They can't say, oh, you're not allowed to drive in Indiana. You are, because you have an Ohio license. Or marriage licenses. That's why when gay marriage was a big thing going on, like the big topic in the news, so a lot of people were arguing against it because whether or not their state allowed gay marriage to take place in the state, if someone got married in a gay legal state, like a legalized gay marriage state, then they were therefore by default married in the other states, because you must recognize licenses granted by other states. So that's a pretty cool case. It really is a good constitutional government type of case. So I don't know. I like it. I don't care what your beliefs are on gay marriage or not, but I think it's just a cool question of government. So our next step, the next thing we always do, is we look at anything that happened in history that would change the way this principle was interpreted. So basically, how was federalism interpreted in this case? What we have is Gibbons versus Ogden. Now, in Gibbons versus Ogden, it's an interesting Supreme Court case. New York granted Ogden, the state granted Ogden, the only license to navigate the waterways along New York's coast. They had one license and they gave it to one guy, Ogden, okay? He would charge people a fee to use the waterway if they wanted to trade it with New York. Now, I'm simplifying this case, but basically they would charge, he had the ability to charge people a fee if they wanted to use the waterways. Gibbons had a license issued by the federal government to navigate all waters along the U.S. coast. He had a federal license for all U.S. coastal waterways. New York tried to fine Gibbons because he was navigating his boat in New York waters without state permission. So based on federalism and based on the Supremacy Clause, if you rationalize your thinking here, if you think through it, you know that the federal government is supreme. So the federal license is really, the state can't prevent him from utilizing his federal license. The federal license is the one that must be followed by every state, whether it's New York, South Carolina, North Carolina, Rhode Island, whatever. Okay? The federal government license is supreme, meaning that that license is valid and he can trade in New York, or he can navigate New York's waterways. So according to the Supremacy Clause, a federal law or license is more important than any state law or license. Therefore, Gibbons had federal approval to navigate the waters, and any law restricting him from doing that is not allowed. Next slide. I like this case too, okay? And we'll watch a video here in a minute about this. McCulloch versus Maryland. The way this works, and this is after, I think it was Alexander Hamilton's economic plan, or was it Jefferson's? One of the economic plans, I can't remember. But in McCulloch versus Maryland, Maryland placed a tax on all banks that were not chartered or approved by the state of Maryland. In US history, the United States had recently created a second national bank, which is a federal bank. The Second National Bank is a federal bank. Bank owned and operated by the government. That's what that means, right? Therefore, the question became, can the state of Maryland place a tax on a federal institution? Can Maryland tax the Second National Bank, the federal bank? Can a state tax the federal government? And the answer is no. Maryland cannot tax the federal government. That's essentially what it comes down to. According to the Supremacy Clause, the federal institution is supreme and outside of regulation of any individual state. So individual states cannot regulate this federal institution. Okay? It's the federal government is supreme. Now the video we're going to watch is the Hip Hughes history, and he calls it the Who's Your Daddy Clause, and he does this really good analogy. It's basically, imagine if you, a child, or if a child went to their parents, 14, 15-year-old child went to their parents and said, hey, mom, dad, I'm going to charge you rent for staying in your house. No, that doesn't work. You can't tell your parents they've got to pay you because they are living in their house. Like, you're not the boss. Okay? The next thing I want to talk about expanding federal power. And now we're getting into things that maybe are the underlying root issues of the Civil War. So this is important for us to talk about. Beginning with the Force Bill of 1833. Now, the Force Bill of 1833, here's some background, okay? Congress had passed 2 laws raising tariffs. Remember, tariffs are a tax on imported goods. Specifically, states in the South, like South Carolina, specifically South Carolina, felt that these tariffs favored the northern states and hurt the southern states. And there's some economic reasoning behind this. These southern states, they relied heavily on importing foreign goods, basically, because they did not have as much industrial power in the South. The North was very much industrialized. They were creating finished products, goods, services, those sorts of things. The South wasn't. And so this law, in their eyes, specifically favored northern industrialized states. South Carolina decided that they were going to nullify the law, and they refused to pay the taxes. Now, the federal government thought, well, this is it. We agreed to these things, right? They didn't quite have a plan for how they were going to, make states pay these taxes. So the federal government did not have a plan if the state refused to follow the laws created by the federal government. So what do we do if the states don't follow our laws? The Force Bill of 1833 expanded the powers of the president and allowed him to send the United States military and use force to guarantee the taxes were paid. All right? It gave him the ability to use force to make sure the taxes were paid. We also see something like this early in American history with the Whiskey Rebellion. Certain people in Tennessee, I believe it was Tennessee, didn't want to pay the whiskey tax, and so they basically rebelled. And I'm pretty sure Washington sent troops, or he himself went and forced them to pay up on the taxes. He sort of used military force to make them pay. So Force Bill of 1833. It is like it sounds. Force, as in he's allowed to use force to make them pay these taxes, okay? Now, I really think this is sneaky. I think the federal government has gotten extremely sneaky in the last, 70 years. Specifically, even in my opinion, since the New Deal. Now, if you guys know anything about the New Deal, it was this Franklin Roosevelt's plan to get the United States back on track, right, by using a lot of federal money to essentially spur economic development in the states. The states became very reliant on some of this money. So a grant is when the federal government gives money to the states. The federal government is giving money to the states. This money can be used for a variety of purposes, right? But most commonly, the money is used for when I say most commonly, in our instance, the money is being used for building highways and funding schools, all right? That's the way a lot of federal money is spent, building highways and funding schools. What it does, though, is it makes the state rely on this federal money to operate. Therefore, the federal government can threaten to stop giving this money if the state doesn't do what the federal government asks. And this has happened. When we had Senator McCauley, our local senator in our state government, come and talk to us, he talked about this, okay? South Dakota, the drinking age. This is the perfect example. The federal government wanted to establish a minimum drinking age for the nation. They wanted it to be 21 years old, okay? Before then, 18 in some states it was 21. I don't know if anyone was lower than 18, but there's that. According to the Constitution, the federal government does not have that power. They don't get to decide who can and can't drink. That's not their power, okay? In order to get around the problem, the United States told South Dakota, specifically in this instance, that they would stop giving them highway money unless they changed their drinking age from 18 to 21. It's a big deal. They need that highway money. If you think about it, those highways are like the lifeblood of trade and commerce in these states. Just think of all the semis carrying goods back and forth, right? If their highways go to crap, or they can't clear them of snow because they don't have money to buy salt and pay the snowplow drivers, or if they can't repave them after all these potholes pop up, it's potentially a threat to South Dakota's commerce, right? And so South Dakota had no choice in this instance but to sort of go with it. The federal government doesn't have the power to limit drinking age, but they do have the ability to stop giving states money. Very, very sneaky. It makes you wonder what else they could do to the states. I'm telling you guys, the states and the nation is increasingly relying on that federal money, and it's be curious to see where it goes. So we'll watch McCall versus Maryland. We'll watch this video, and I'll put a link for it in this video for anyone that watches this in the comments. And then let's look at this last slide. Federal versus state today. This one is, when I first created this slideshow, it was often talking about sanctuary cities, right? And so when we're teachers, we're always told to make things relevant, make it deal with today. So something that deals with us, right? There's these things called sanctuary cities. As of now, or when I created this, I still believe it's quite the case, local police officers are not required to send illegal immigrants back to their country of origin if they are arrested or stopped for lesser crimes, theft, speeding, domestic violence, those sorts of things. Man, tell these NFL players domestic violence isn't a lesser crime. It really, I think that one is, and since I made this slideshow, has really changed in public perception. But anyways, there's pressure on cities to deport all illegal immigrants that are discovered. Federal pressure. Many cities are refusing to deport immigrants for simple crimes. These cities are known as sanctuary cities. Okay? Their main argument is that immigration control is a federal responsibility. The federal government's in charge of handling immigration issues. And local police are not responsible for enforcing immigration laws. Local police are not in charge of immigration laws. It requires a serious amount of manpower, and the local police force is busy dealing with other issues, and so they don't even want to really have to look into this federal responsibility, in their opinion. President Trump has made a stance that he wants all illegal immigrants who are stopped by local police to be deported immediately. So it's almost like if you're stopped by the cops, he wants you to be deported, basically. If it's found that you're illegal, he wants you out. He says if cities refuse to comply, Trump had threatened to cut federal aid to those cities. Now, as far as I know, it's never happened. It hasn't went through, but this was a really big standing point early on in his presidential tenure. Most of the federal aid in question is used towards helping fund local police forces. So it's almost like, hey, if you don't follow through with this, well, then I'm just going to stop giving you this federal money anyways. Okay. And I will try to give you a link to this. Hopefully it's still live, but it's a 2016 NPR piece about sanctuary cities. It's actually really entertaining, and if you haven't listened to any NPR stuff, they do a really good job of storytelling. Fairly unbiased, as close to unbiased as media can get, I guess. But I feel like they do a good job telling both sides of the story. So yeah, look at that. Okay. So these things we just went over are the ways federalism has changed. Make sure that you study them, make sure that you know them, so that way when we get to our quiz, which I think is going to be our next class, that we're here, you know what you're doing. Okay? All right, we'll go back and watch McCullough versus